The champagne was still cold in my hand when my phone rang and cut through the quiet of the evening. The call came at the moment I had imagined for years. For 3 decades, I had built a business from the ground up. I had sold the company 3 months before and had the freedom to do as I wished. I bought a beach cottage on the dunes of Cape May with money I had earned. I had planned to sit in the sun and read books. I had not had time to read. I had planned to welcome good friends and chosen family. I had not planned for strangers to show up at my door the way they did. My son Lucas had a voice that carried a strange mix of entitlement and certainty. He expected things often without thinking of the cost to others. He expected me to be available and to comply. I had helped him many times before. I had helped him start his small design business. I had supported him when it failed the first time. I had lent him money when the rent needed to be paid. I had driven across town at midnight to pick up a young man who had run out of options. I had done these things because I loved him as a parent does. I had also taught him to be responsible and honest. The phone call that evening was not about congratulations. It was not about joy or pride in my new home. It was about a demand disguised as a casual plan. He told me that his partner Nina's family would arrive the next day. He told me that they would occupy the main rooms. He told me that I should move upstairs to a guest room. He said it was only for 2 weeks. He said it as if it were decided already. I remember the exact words. "Mom, you need to move to the upstairs guest room. Nina's family is flying in tomorrow. They expect the master suite and the large bedrooms. You can use the guest room. It has an ocean view." There was no warm voice on the line. There was no thanks for the years of support. There was only a casual demand. For a moment I felt stunned. The sunset was turning the ocean gold beyond my deck. I sat and listened to gulls cry over the water. The beauty should have made me feel calm. Instead, I felt a tightness in my chest. Lucas was the son I had worked hard to raise. He had gone to business school with my help. He had tried projects that did not work. I had helped him again and again. Yet his tone told me he expected more. The small voice in my head kept asking why he could not simply say please. Why did he always take good things for granted? I thought of all the times I had put my own plans aside for his sake. I thought of the small dinners I had missed to help him move. The late checks I had written when he had shortfalls. The quiet nights when I had worried about his future. Even so, I knew I could not let him speak to me like that. Not in my new house. Not after all I had done. The house symbolized something I had earned. It symbolized long years of work, of planning, of saving for a future where I could rest. I had wanted to step away from the noise of business. I had wanted mornings with coffee and the ocean light. The idea that my own child assumed I would give all that up felt like a small theft. After the call, I put my hand to the glass and watched the waves. I tried to listen to the water and breathe, as if the sea itself could calm my annoyance. My training from decades of business told me not to rush. Never react the moment the arrow hits you. Wait, observe, learn, make a plan. I began to plan. Let them think they won. Let them settle in. Let them grow comfortable. Then I would decide how to respond. That night I slept uneasily in my new home. The house felt too big in the dark, but the silence was also a comfort. I told myself to keep calm. I reminded myself of the facts. I owned the cottage. I had bought it with my money after selling a business I had built for 30 years. I had the right to enjoy it. I was not a hotel or a rental. I was not a caretaker who must always give in. I had fought harder battles in conference rooms and negotiation tables. If the time came, I would draw on that strength. The next morning I woke before the sun. I made coffee and sat on the deck. The sky lightened, and the gulls began their morning calls. I watched the road to the cottage. I had an empty feeling, a quiet tension. Then cars came into view. Several cars rolled up the drive like a small convoy. It was early, much earlier than polite arrival times. People jumped out, carrying bags and coolers. They moved like people who believed the place belonged to them. From the upstairs window, I watched as they walked to my front door, smiling and talking. They carried no hesitation. They carried no pause to ask permission. They simply moved through my home like it was a public place. My heart sank. I put on a robe and walked downstairs. I decided I would greet them. I decided I would be calm. I decided I would go slow and find my moment. At the door I smiled. Nina froze for a beat, then smiled back. "Vivian," she said. "Lucas told us you had moved upstairs. Good. The master has the morning light, and it is better for your arthritis." She never asked if I wanted to sleep downstairs. She never said hello to my guests, or to me, as if she had just been invited. Her parents walked by, carrying my towels and bags. They wheeled suitcases into the master suite, like people checking into a resort. "Coffee is in the kitchen," I offered. I felt an odd smallness in my own house. Nina opened the pantry without asking. She began rearranging my shelves, moving boxes and containers as if she were organizing a rental home. "Mom is on a special diet," she said. "The kids are picky. We brought our own supplies." I watched her place my groceries into a box. The casual way she treated my life made my skin prickle. I thought of the years that made this house possible. By noon, the house had changed. Towels draped my antique chairs. Pool toys lay scattered. The kitchen counters were in a mess with open containers and sticky signs of many hands. Guests lounged in my living room, as if this had always been their place. My books had been tucked away, as if they were clutter. My framed photos were politely moved to closets. I felt a mild shock, as my home became a temporary hotel for my son's in-laws. I stayed calm. I walked to the garage and took out my phone. I made 3 important calls, one to my lawyer to check the deed, one to my accountant to confirm title details, one to an investigator I used when I needed background checks during business deals. I asked for quick work. I asked for details. I did not tell them. I felt betrayed. I told them I wanted clarity and security. By evening, I had gathered the facts I needed. I had started a plan. They would not know what I planned to do next. I would let them grow comfortable. I would let them assume I was powerless. I would let them believe they had already won. Then, when it mattered, I would act with certainty. For now, the sea rolled on. The cottage held light from lamps inside. I made myself a quiet dinner and thought of the days to come. The morning after they arrived felt like the start of a new kind of life. The house had an energy that belonged to strangers. I woke to voices and movement far earlier than I liked. Nina's family had turned my kitchen into their morning station. My coffee maker had a line in front of it like the snack bar at a campground. My own cups were pushed to the back of the shelf. My little notebook with address labels was gone. The child of 30 years had come home with a troop of other people who expected comfort. I moved slowly downstairs and tried to greet them as if nothing was wrong. "Coffee is in the kitchen," I said softly. "Help yourselves." They did so with no pause. They poured as if they had been living here for years. My grandmother's quilt lay folded over an armchair. A teenager took a marker and began to draw on the dining table placemat and did not stop when I moved closer. Nina's mother stood at the island and began preparing a meal that included exactly what she liked and nothing I recognized as my inventory. "Vivian," she said, without meeting my eyes, "we need you to run to the store. Kevin's partner is lactose intolerant, and Rachel's youngest is allergic to everything." I made a list. She handed me a long, neat paper with foods and brands underlined and highlighted. A strange part of me wanted to laugh. I had been the one to feed people for years. I had organized conferences with buffets and coffee stations. I had been the person who bought food for hundreds of strangers and made them feel welcome. Now my own pantry felt like a public resource. I took the list and said I would go. I had errands to do that would serve my own plan as well. I drove into town and bought items that would help later. I stopped at the hardware store and bought a few tools I thought I might need. I went to the phone company and discussed options for a stronger and more secure internet package. I visited my bank and asked about extra account protections. I kept my voice quiet and my purpose clear. When I returned, the house looked as if the storm had grown, towels left damp on the deck, children's toys near the pool, footprints on the living room runner. My framed photos had been stacked in a corner like things to be stored for a time. Kevin had moved my couches to sit closer to the television. Rachel's kids had painted pictures on paper that now decorated the walls. There was an air of ownership that caused my chest to tighten. At lunchtime, Nina mentioned a large barbecue she planned for the weekend. "We'll invite about 30 people," she said, casually. "Brandon's friends, and a few people from town. We'll need lots of food, and maybe someone will bring a DJ. It will be fun." She sounded excited and oblivious at once. I tutored myself to stay neutral. I said nothing and sipped my water. I watched them move about the kitchen like bees. They did not consider that I might want a quiet afternoon reading. That evening, while they argued over which playlist would be used, I made more calls. I called a friend who ran a catering business and asked what it would take to put on a premium dinner. I called a friend who ran an event management company and asked whether they could handle a quick, large event on short notice. My calls sounded normal. I lied and said I wanted to throw a small gathering for some local friends. Each person promised to help. I gave them generous instructions and a clear budget. My plan was forming. Their party talk grew louder. They spoke of guests and networks as if my house existed for their connections. They planned to use the property to host people who could help them in their own businesses. Lucas spoke proudly about how he was building contacts who would grow his small projects into something larger. He said it was all temporary and would bring value to the home and to the family. That was his pitch. He expected me to nod and agree. But the more they bragged about the opportunity, the clearer it became to me that they had mistaken my kindness for a blank check. The idea that they could use my home as a stage for networking and that I would somehow benefit later felt careless. I thought about my plan and the truth of what responsibility meant. Ownership carried not only rights but duties. I had the right to decide how my home was used. They did not get to assume it belonged to them. That night I slept lightly. I had asked my lawyer to pull the deed and check the ownership details. I wanted to confirm how the cottage was titled and what protections I had set up. I had my accountant review the setup of the ownership entity. I had made sure the property was in an LLC that I controlled. I had asked for a local property manager who would handle bookings. These steps were practical and deliberate. They were not dramatic. They were the result of a life of making sure there were no loose ends and no surprises. Meanwhile, the house below me hummed with people. They practiced party songs and made lists. They compared what foods people liked and what liquors were best for the beach. I sat on the guest room bed and read about estate law and tenant protections. I read quietly and made notes. I did not want to threaten my family with open war, but I also would not allow them to treat my life as if it were a resource to be exhausted. The truth that came to me that night felt simple and hard both. If you want something from me, ask with respect and gratitude. The assumption that you can take without asking is not family. It is entitlement. In the morning I would act. I would let them have one more day to prove themselves. I would let them relax into belief that this place belonged to them. Then I would move. The sea outside kept its steady rhythm. The sun rose and painted the waves. I focused on that sound and stored my strength for the moment I would need it. The morning of the big plan was bright and hot. People moved in and out of the house with hands full of coolers and cups. The children played near the pool and left wet footprints across my deck. I watched them as if I were an observer in a play. They did not see me for who I was. They saw only an older woman who could be moved aside. The feeling of being unseen stung. Nina's mother, Patricia, declared that she was organizing breakfast and set out to clear my kitchen counters. She opened cabinets and labeled jars. "We will need a lot of gluten-free bread," she said, "and coconut milk, the good kind. The kids have special needs." She handed me a 3-page list and looked at me expectantly. I took the list without complaint. I offered to go into town. But when I left, I did not only buy the items she required, I also bought other things to help me later. I visited a specialty shop and bought extra linens, high-quality towels, and a few things that I thought would be useful for guests in the future. When I returned, the house had become louder. People had moved my art pieces to a side table. A few trophies were tucked in a closet. My kitchen table was covered in party plans. Kevin and his girlfriend were arguing about where to put the speakers. In a corner, Lucas talked on the phone to someone and said, "Yes, we can host some clients here. My mother is fine with it." He said it like a fact. He said it as a plan already made. I kept calm. I helped where I needed to. I did small favors. I answered questions about how to use the coffee maker. I showed someone where the beach towels were, but I also continued to work on my own plan in quiet. At the back of my mind, I felt the thrill of setting things in motion. Years of negotiation had taught me that leverage matters. If they wanted the house to be their stage, then the stage would come with real costs. That afternoon, I received a text from a catering company. Tom Morrison, an old friend, messaged asking if I needed help with a big dinner. I replied that I might and gave a vague reply. I asked how fast his team could set up and what a premium job might cost. Within an hour, he called and gave me numbers. The fee was steep. It was the kind of price associated with gala events. It was deliberate. I did not tell Nina or Lucas that I had hired him. I did not want to spark a fight in front of the guests. I wanted to create a moment. I wanted to show them what choices they had made. By evening, the catering truck rolled in. It was a large trailer with a uniformed team and ample equipment. When people saw the setup, their talk of backyard grilling turned quiet. The transformation from casual barbecue to an elegant dinner took less than an hour. Linens and silver replaced paper plates. Crystal glasses appeared. Lobster and roast were placed with care. I stepped onto the deck in a dress I had chosen because it made me feel like the woman I had been in important meetings. I felt a calm and precise power that only time could give. I called for attention and said a few words. People stopped. I told them I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I told them I was glad they enjoyed the house. I then said that, for such a large gathering, we would provide a proper dinner and the best champagne. Lucas froze. He had expected a shabby backyard meal that would cost little. He had not expected a bill that would remind him that he had claimed management. The catering staff set tables and began service. Guests moved from cheap beers to glasses of champagne. The tone of the evening changed from casual talk to something refined and costly. The shift affected Lucas. He watched his planned image of success falter into numbers in his head. After the meal, there was a buzz of admiration. People commented on the quality of the food. They praised the setting and the service. I watched Lucas struggle to justify the party. He mumbled something about having promised to manage the place. I replied that if he took on the role publicly, responsibility followed. The cleverness of the moment hit home. The invoice would show who authorized the service. The memory of who had claimed authority for the house would remain. The next morning, the mood had altered. Money matters had a way of clarifying intentions. Lucas and Nina were quieter. He called banks and tried to explain a sudden need for credit. He explained his role to his lawyer, who panicked at an unexpected $15,000 catering bill. It was an awkward morning for people who counted on easy favors. I poured my coffee and asked casually how the night had felt. They looked at the empty champagne bottles with new eyes. By noon, a phone call came that would change everything further. "Mrs. Carter, this is Heather, from Cape May Realty. We received an inquiry about the property. Someone named Lucas called and said he represented the owner. He asked about a possible sale." I put the call on speaker. The house grew very still. No one moved. I said I had not listed the property. Heather asked if someone had misrepresented the facts. I replied I would look into it. The silence after that call felt like a held breath. If Lucas had told real estate agents he managed or represented the property, then he had stepped beyond simple family assumption. He had moved into territory where choices could have legal consequences. I thought of how often people confuse familiarity with authority. You can live under a roof because of blood ties and still have no right to speak for the owner. I called my lawyer Elena and told her about the call. That afternoon I walked through the house and inspected what had been moved. My grandmother's quilts were folded on a chair. My awards were tucked into boxes. My old travel books lay in a corner. I began to return small things to their place. I met neighbors who had been invited. They greeted me politely. They said they had enjoyed the evening. Some had complimented Lucas on his hosting. I nodded and thanked them. Inside, I felt a resolve form. By evening, the house felt quieter. Lucas and his guests were less certain of their hold on the place. I had not shouted or argued. I had only taken measured steps. I had shown that claims of authority come with responsibility. I had not yet used the legal facts. I only hinted at what was possible. Still, the point sank in. People who overreach must sometimes be reminded with costs that are not comfortable. I sat on my deck that night and watched the ocean. It was still the same sea. The same waves rolled in. But I had changed inside. I had taken a stand that was not rude or violent. I had acted like a person who had earned the right to quiet and to make their own choices. For the first time in days, I felt a small lightness return to the corners of my mouth. I did not know what would happen next. I only knew what I would accept and what I would not. The weekend party arrived with a string of shiny cars and more guests than I expected. People stepped from vehicles and into my garden like they had been invited to a resort. Many of them I did not know. They chatted with one another, as if they had a right to be there. I stood in the doorway and watched them arrange the space. Chairs were grouped, a playlist started, and then changed as people disagreed. Servers circulated with glasses. The energy felt loud and a little chaotic. Lucas stood near the grill and told anyone who would listen about how he had been building connections and partnerships. He seemed proud of the facade he had created. "This house is perfect for creating opportunities," he said to a small group. "My mother is generous and gives us the space. This can be a hub for local contacts." The way he spoke made me feel like I was a resource rather than a person. I remained quiet and measured. I let him believe he had the floor. I let him talk. As the evening turned to twilight, guests moved closer to the pool. Laughter rose, and the scent of roasted meat filled the air. Someone clinked a glass and asked if they should start the main course. The crowd cheered. I stepped out and observed. I had a plan that evening, too. I had arranged for premium catering. When the main plates arrived and people tasted high-quality food, the atmosphere shifted from a casual cookout to a high-end dinner. The sound of surprise came in small murmurs. People remarked on the food. They sipped wine and talked more seriously. The shift made my point without my having to say much. Lucas looked like a man who had been asked to pay for more than he expected. He called his bank and tried to justify charges. He spoke in clipped sentences and tried to negotiate credit lines. I watched his face as the realization dawned that claiming authority brings obligations. It was a useful lesson in the world where words must match deeds. People who say they manage must also manage costs. After the event was over and the guests had left, I found a quiet satisfaction in the way the night had solved more than a single problem. The event had shown who had been making promises and who had taken responsibility. It had created a paper trail of invoices and authorizations. The documentation would be important if the fight continued. For someone who spent a career building evidence in contracts, evidence was comforting. Early the next week, the consequences of Lucas's decisions began to show. I received a call from Heather at Cape May Realty again. She said someone had inquired about the property, and a caller had claimed to represent the owner. She wanted to confirm. I told her the truth. I had not authorized any sale. If someone misrepresented my authority, it could be illegal. She said she would note it and said that callers like that sometimes try to test the waters. I thought of how small deceptions could grow into larger claims. Then another caller arrived at my door. A woman in a neat gray suit said she was an attorney representing Lucas, and that he was concerned about my mental state and the speed of my decisions. The words felt like a slap. She used the term elder exploitation with the polite tone of a professional. She implied my decisions might have been a mistake made under pressure. I heard the implication that I might be judged incapable and that others should step in. I felt anger and a cold clarity. Elena, my lawyer, and I had prepared for these kinds of moves. Years in business had taught me to expect people to weaponize the law if it suited their goals. I called Elena and we spoke frankly. We gathered documents. We made a record of the steps I had taken. I made sure to include phone logs and receipts. I wanted the facts above all. Facts were clean and hard to dispute. At the same time, I did not want to make the battle more personal than it already was. It was painful that my child would call a lawyer to assess my capacity rather than sit and listen. It hurt deeper than any legal threat. It hurt because it revealed a lack of trust and a readiness to sacrifice our relationship for a chance at money. Still, the law was my tool now. I would use it calmly and without drama. In the days that followed, an unexpected problem arose. A new tenant called me and said a man claiming to be my son had called their workplace and told dangerous lies. He had said they were staying in the home of someone who was mentally unstable. He suggested that their children were at risk. He told stories meant to frighten and dislodge tenants. The woman who called me had recorded times and numbers and was frightened. She asked if this was true. I told her simply that it was not true. I told her I had filed everything correctly and that I ran this place responsibly. The pattern of harassment looked designed. If tenants left, my income would drop and my argument of stability would weaken. The logic was ugly and practical. Lucas had turned to a plan that attacked my livelihood to break my independence. The private investigator I had earlier hired called me with new information. He had dug into Lucas's finances and found that his business had been late on rent payments and that he was trying to secure loans using inheritance projections. He had been shopping for attorneys who would say I was incompetent. The report was damning. When I read the investigator's findings, I felt sorrow and shock. It hurt to see a son reduce a mother's life to a line of numbers. It hurt to be a resource in someone's eyes, yet the facts were clear and they were useful. I called Elena with the new evidence and asked her to prepare filings for elder abuse complaints and harassment charges. She warned me the family fight could become ugly. I said I understood. I wanted safety and fairness more than quiet. The weeks that followed were heavy with legal work. We filed restraining orders and documented harassment calls. We asked for help from local property managers to confirm bookings and payments. The paperwork stacked up and the investigators' reports made a clear case. When the social worker from Adult Protective Services came to check on me in response to a call, she found a tidy home and a woman who managed her finances and who could explain her business. The report from that visit was in my favor. It said the initial complaint appeared malicious. I felt both relieved and weary. The attacks had been real, but the law and my careful planning had protected me from the worst. Still, the emotional price was steep. The idea of my son working so hard to control my life left me with a raw grief. I grieved not only what had been lost, but also the future of the relationship. I thought of the things we could have shared. I had hoped he would be part of my quiet afternoons. That hope was gone. In the months after the legal moves, my life slowly regained a new pattern. I continued to host guests who respected the house and followed the rules. I found satisfaction in a different kind of community, people who chose to be kind and who respected boundaries. The garden returned to a calmer pace. I found new friends nearby and restored small rituals, like morning coffee on the deck and quiet walks on the sand. The house was still my home. It felt like the place I had always wanted. The legal process crept along in slow, careful steps. Elena prepared filings. The restraining order was requested. Complaints of harassment and false reporting were made. Each document carried traces of the messy family history. I sat across from my lawyer in a small conference room and watched as she laid out what she planned to present. The paper trail was long. It included phone logs, invoices, eyewitness statements, and the investigator's detailed report. When I looked at those documents, I felt both vindicated and hollow. Evidence gave power, but it did not give back the son I had lost. I found myself remembering small moments of tenderness when he was young. I remembered teaching him to tie his shoes, and the first time he rode a bike. I thought of birthdays and hospital visits, and late-night talks at the kitchen table. Those memories were real and painful in equal measure. Lucas's lawyer sent a formal letter. It accused me indirectly of making hasty decisions. It said that there might be cause to examine whether I had the capacity to manage the property and the related business. The lawyer used careful language designed to make the issue sound like a concern rather than a threat. It felt like a manipulation. I asked Elena to respond with facts and to emphasize the investigative findings that showed Lucas had been planning this takeover for months. That discovery shocked me. The report showed he had consulted multiple elder law attorneys. He had searched for ways to have someone declared incompetent. He had considered conservatorship as a path to control. The investigator found that he had mentioned expected inheritance to lenders as a basis for loans. The chain of motives looked ugly and clear. My mouth felt dry when I read it. We scheduled a meeting where Lucas would come and speak in the presence of lawyers. I wanted to hear him explain himself. I wanted to see if there remained any remnant of the son who had hugged me when I cried or who had said I was important. I also wanted him to understand the line he had crossed. The day of the meeting I dressed simply and firmly. I wanted to appear as I felt, steady, clear, and true to myself. In Elena's office, Lucas appeared smaller than I remembered. He fidgeted with his phone and avoided eye contact. His lawyer made rapid notes and whispered instructions. The atmosphere had the sharp smell of legal strategy. Elena opened with the facts and asked direct questions. She asked him to explain why he had visited elder law offices and why he had spoken to lenders about inheritance. He faltered to answer. "How did you expect this to end?" Elena demanded. "Did you imagine your mother would simply hand over property because you asked?" Her voice was firm but not cruel. Lucas swallowed and tried to say he had acted out of love and concern. He talked about fear of my being alone and about a promise he felt he had to keep. He spoke about a wish to manage things, so I would not be taken advantage of. The words sounded thin in the room. When asked whether any attorney had told him that my judgment was seriously impaired, he hesitated. This was the critical point. He had sought legal opinions that would allow him to claim a problem. He had shopped for answers that fit his plan. The implication was clear. The legal approach had not flowed from a single honest concern. It had been engineered to achieve a result. That day I asked one direct question. "When did you stop being my son and start treating me like a problem to be solved by lenders and lawyers?" He did not answer directly. He looked at the papers and then at me. He tried to say that it started after the death of his father, that he had been frightened and uncertain, and that he had acted out of duty. For a moment I allowed myself to see the possibility of misunderstanding. Then I thought of the calls to tenants, the false reports to authorities, and the credit applications listing anticipated inheritance. Those were not acts of love, they were acts of calculation. After the meeting, Elena filed motions as planned. We asked the court to consider the evidence and to issue orders to prevent further harassment. The judge set a hearing date. In the meantime, the social worker's report and the investigator's file were already in the mix. The combination created a strong position. I felt safer for now. But the emotional work remained. I was grieving a son I had once known. I was grieving the idea of family trust replaced by financial planning. Outside the legal world, I made other plans. I focused on building a new sense of community. I invited neighbors I trusted for quiet dinners. I found joy in small things. The way the sea smelled after a storm. How the light hit the porch in the early hours, the sound of a good book in my hands. Guests who came to rent the cottage were respectful and kind. They thanked me for keeping things tidy and for leaving a few welcome notes. The positive interactions reminded me that my life could be gentle again. At home, I kept the paper trail and the records. I printed invoices and stowed them in a folder. I printed the investigator's reports and highlighted important sections. I stored them with my legal papers. Knowing the facts were in order helped me sleep with less dread. I kept a small journal of daily life. I wrote down details that might be useful and also as a way to reflect and process my feelings. Writing turned my scattering thoughts into something that could be held. One afternoon, I received a call from a woman named Mrs. Parker, who had stayed the previous summer with her family. She asked if she could hold her daughter's wedding at the cottage. Her voice was soft and full of gratitude. She told me the wedding would be small, maybe 100 people, mostly family and close friends. Her girls wanted a beach wedding because it remembered the peaceful time they had previously had there. I felt a happy jolt. Of course, I said. I would be honored. The rental income for the wedding would be helpful. More importantly, the choice of guests would be gentle and kind. It felt like proof that I had made the right decision to reclaim the house. The cottage would host joy rather than conflict. Weeks passed and the legal process took its own time. I received an apology letter from Lucas via his lawyer. It was formal and polite. He offered to attend counseling and requested structured visitation. My lawyer suggested a calm, neutral reply. In the end, I chose to say no thank you. I had been hurt in ways that required more than paper apologies. I wanted a life where my choices stood respected without debate. I wanted peace. I found new ways to spend the mornings. I walked early on the beach and fascinated at birds. I drank coffee on the back porch and read. I tended a small herb garden by the kitchen door and learned the joy of pruning rosemary and thyme. The cottage became a home again. The guests who visited were people I chose. The people who stayed respected the rules and the property. The house settled. The courtroom hearings stretched over months. Each day we brought in witnesses, bank clerks, delivery drivers, apartment managers, and the small-time runners who had once helped with cash or cars. Each voice built a picture that was patient and terrible. Many of the witnesses were ordinary people who had only done small jobs. They suddenly realized their role in something larger. At trial, the prosecution laid out the timeline of events. They placed Margaret and her helpers at the scenes. They showed photos from storage units, receipts for burial plots, and recordings from wiretaps. One by one, the pieces fit together. One of the most painful parts was hearing about the last days of men like Thomas. The prosecution read his last messages to me and others. They showed how he had tried to call for help, and how his calls came more often as he got weaker. It was like a slow fade that no one had seen as violence at the time. A forensic toxicologist explained how ricin and other similar toxins can mimic chronic illness. Left unchecked, he said, these compounds look like age or stress. He showed charts of liver levels and metabolites, words I had never used before. Metabolites, half-life, enzyme markers became plain and terrible in meaning. The jury listened in silence. Witness after witness spoke of the small domestic scenes, casseroles, tea with too many pills, an insistence to move in, a quick talk about wills. The pattern felt like a script repeated with different actors. It was chilling and terribly clear. When the jury returned a guilty verdict, the courtroom released a long-held breath. Margaret sat with shoulders tight. She looked small and furious in equal measures. The judge sentenced her to multiple life terms. There was no parole. The sentence was a kind of closure for families who had waited years for answers. Even with the sentence, new questions came. The network had holes. Eric had named people who might have helped, but not everyone came forward. Not all the receipts matched a place. I realized our job would continue for years. Cases reopened like doors that did not fully close. After the trials, I was asked many times to speak about the work. I visited community centers and libraries. People came to hear how to spot patterns and how to protect loved ones. I learned to speak without collapsing. Telling the story was hard, but telling it meant fewer people might fall for the same lies. The cold case unit continued to work. We reopened files that had sat untouched for a decade. Modern tests gave answers where there had been only suspicion. Families who had lived with a question mark finally saw clarity. Not all answers were neat. Some tests were inconclusive, but each reopened file gave us a chance to bring truth. I also began to write down what we learned. A small manual for community leaders and grief groups, how to run background checks on volunteers, how to keep meals public, how to notice small signs of control. These were not legal tools, but small common sense steps that help reduce risk. Sharing the manual felt like giving back. Through all this, my life changed in small ways. I still had moments of quiet when Thomas's memory came, like a sudden ache, but the work gave shape to the grief. I met other families and saw how their lives continued in small, bright ways. Robert Chen sent a card 1 year later. He had begun a small volunteer group for men. He had found slow and steady friends who were not threats. That note warmed me. 1 year after Thomas died, we held a small remembrance at Oak Hill. A new headstone now took the place where the temporary marker had been. I wrote words on the stone and read them aloud. Friends, family, and some of the detectives came. We planted roses near the grave, a small living thing to grow where loss had been. Detective Martinez said that our work saved more than the arrested people. "You taught us to listen differently," he told me. He meant the detectives. He also meant me. The way I watched and the way I questioned had made a difference. I thought of that and kept going. When I think back to the first time that the phone went to voicemail, I still feel that cold. But I also feel a slow warmth. A warmth from people who stood with me. A warmth from small victories that mattered. The work of the cold case unit continued. Lives moved forward slowly, and the gardens we planted grew. I still wonder sometimes about how one person can carry so much and keep going. Maybe it is stubbornness. Maybe it is love. For me, it was being a mother who could not accept silence about her son. For others, it was the detectives who would not close a file, the neighbors who spoke up, and the small communities that learned to watch for small signs. In the end, the truth was messy and long. The court made a decision, but the work did not stop. We kept looking, we kept asking, and when we found answers, families got pieces of peace. That is why I stayed in that office late at night, reading old files by the lamp. I wanted to make sure Thomas's story was not forgotten, and that other stories would not end the same way. Months after the legal actions, the house was calm again. The new local management company took over bookings and handled guest relations. Their team was polite and efficient. They managed the calendars and answered questions about pool rules and barbecue times. I chose people I trusted to act on my behalf. The knowledge that a team was working made the days lighter. The community around the cottage surprised me with more kindness than I expected. Neighbors I had barely spoken to before came by with small pies and houseplants. One neighbor walked my dog twice a week and left notes about the tide. Another stopped by with a basket of lemons from her tree. These small interactions built a different kind of family for me. People who come into your life, not because they expect benefits, but because they like you, are rare and precious. I felt grateful. Lucas was still a presence in court files, but less in daily life. The judge had issued orders preventing further calls to tenants and making clear that any attempt to misrepresent the property in public would be pursued. The legal system moved slowly, but the order made the tactics Lucas had used less viable. He could still write letters through lawyers and ask for counseling and visitation. Those possibilities remained, but they were now framed in legal and clear terms. I used some of the rental income to improve the home. I fixed a leaky roof, painted the siding a soft blue that matched the sea, and planted a few native shrubs that brought birds. I replaced old towels with thick new ones and purchased nicer bedding. These small improvements gave me pleasure and also made guests happier. The rental reviews became warm and thankful. They praised the quiet and the care. They said it felt like a place made with love. I smiled when I read those notes. In private, I continued to do work that mattered to me. I wrote a piece about independence that I posted online. People responded with stories of their own families. Some had experienced similar conflicts with adult children. Others had found new forms of family that were kinder and more respectful. Their messages reminded me that I was not alone. The stories of other people gave me strength and common sense context. Occasionally, I wondered about reconciliation. Would I ever let Lucas visit with supervision? Would I ever accept a written apology? and see signs of real change? Those questions came and went. I wanted to be honest with myself. Trust once broken is hard to restore. It requires clear proof of change and a willingness to be transparent and accountable over time. I did not see that in the months that followed. I wanted to believe he could change, but I also had to protect my life. Then one day a small thing happened that made me feel both sad and amused. A neighbor found an old photograph of Lucas as a boy at my house. She brought it to me and said, "He looked so small here." I touched the picture and felt the warm memory of small hands and scraped knees. For a moment, I allowed myself to have both grief and humor. Life contains both. That photo went into a small album I kept on the kitchen table. As the summer ended and the leaves began to turn, the cottage was still a source of income and joy. The Parker's daughter finally had her wedding in the soft September light. I watched the ceremony from a little distance and felt the kind of quiet happiness that comes from watching people be kind to each other. The event paid well and left me with a small album of photos that friends sent. The bouquets were dried and tucked into a drawer next to letters from guests. Letters continued to arrive. People wrote to thank me and to tell me how important the quiet was. They said the house had saved a weekend or a memory. They wrote about marriages and new friends. I put the letters in a box labeled Good Notes, and I read them on rainy days. Their warmth helped. Occasionally, I still had legal check-ins. Elena called and told me about motions, about minor filings. The process was not pleasant, but it was manageable. I trusted Elena and the investigator. Their careful work had prevented further harassment and had made it possible for me to enjoy my home. I remained cautious but lighter. One evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sky going from orange to purple. The sea had a gentle rhythm of coming and receding. A couple of neighbors walked by with their dog and waved. I raised a cup in salute. At that moment, I felt a surprising clarity. I had chosen a life that honored my work and my dignity. I had chosen to protect myself. I had chosen the people who would share my life. The choice had not been easy, but it felt right. Looking back, I saw that the hardest part was not the legal work or the threats. The hardest part was accepting that a child could choose power over relationship. That understanding is a hard one. It forces a person to acknowledge what they cannot change about another. It also shows what they can change, how they live and who they let into their lives. I had chosen people of kindness. I had chosen peace. The cottage became a place where strangers could rest and where neighbors could be friends. It became a place that paid its bills and brought small joys. It became a home where I could sit in the morning light and read. I had learned to live with openness and firm boundaries. The two together formed a new strength. A year after Thomas's death, life had changed shape. The cold case unit carried a steady list of new leads. The arrests and trials had stopped some predators and exposed others. Our small manual on safe practices had been shared with centers and groups across the state. It was not a cure, but it was a start. I still missed the small things. Thomas's laugh in the kitchen, his dry jokes at holiday dinners, the way he would come by with a packet of seeds and ask which flowers I wanted. Those memories lived in my hands when I planted. I had planted the tulips the spring after his death. That autumn I planted a line of roses where he used to help me build a trellis. The roses grew slowly, pushing through the dirt with a stubborn, quiet strength. When they bloomed, I thought of small truths. Time continues, but so does memory. The roses were both a garden and a promise. Each spring I would prune, water, and watch. It felt like a small repair of the edges of my life. The office at the cold case unit became a new habit. I read files and met families. I spent afternoons at community gatherings teaching short lessons. Bring a friend when a new person comes to dinner. Slow down decisions about merging finances. Check small details. I also learned to say no when the work became too much. Dorothy would call me at odd hours and scold me for staying late. "You have to sleep," she would say. "You are no good to anyone tired." Robert Chen started a support group for men who had been lonely and who wanted company without risk. He invited neighbors and friends to bring sandwiches and talk. His group was a small, everyday success. It helped me not be alone, he wrote me in a note. Those small victories were as real as any courtroom win. The cold case unit solved 8 cases that year. Families came to the office and hugged detectives who had listened for so long. Some people thanked me with tears. Others offered nothing. They did not all want to be friends, and that was okay. We had given them knowledge, and sometimes that was enough. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, we held a small memorial at Oak Hill. Family, detectives, and a few friends stood in a circle. I read a short piece I had written about him. I spoke simply. You were my son. You called me with small news and big plans. I missed you on the day you needed me. I did not speak about revenge or justice. I spoke about the small things, the roses, the calls, the quiet hours. Detective Martinez stood beside me. He had changed his tone over the months from professional to friend. He told the crowd about the detectives who kept files open when others closed them. He gave a gentle nod to everyone who had helped. It felt like a passing of a torch. We had used pain to make a tool to help others. Margaret and her helpers would spend years in the legal system. A few more trials would happen, more names mentioned, more families waiting. The work would continue. That knowledge sits with me like a steady stone under a river. The water moves on, but the stone stays. I still answered emails from people who had questions. I sat on panels for community safety and wrote an article for a small journal about recognizing patterns. My days were not free of grief, but they had purpose. That purpose kept my hands busy and my mind steady. Sometimes, in the quiet garden at dusk, I would sit on the bench Thomas had made when he was young. A soft wind would move the roses, and I would think of his hands, the way they moved when he worked with wood, or when he held my hand in the supermarket. Grief is a shape we learn to carry. It becomes part of who we are. For me, it became a kind of labor to make sure the story of my son did not stop with a lie. Months later, a detective called with news about a cold file in another county. The tests had found traces of a toxin in a body that had once been called natural causes. The family wanted to know. I went to the meeting. The look on their faces when we showed the test results was small and sweet, a piece of peace folded into their life. That is what mattered. At night, before I turned off the lamp, I sometimes said aloud the things I had not said at the funeral. I am sorry I did not answer every call. I would say, I will keep watching. I will keep asking. Saying those words did not change the past, but it made the future feel less like a blank night. If you are listening to this, and something feels odd, a loved one pulling away, a pattern of small things that do not add up, trust the feeling. Ask questions. Call a friend. Let someone else listen. That small step can change everything.